The 18th of March 1890. Otto von Bismarck, the man who unified Germany, formally submits his resignation. 2 days later, Kaiser Wilhelm II accepts it. With that decision, Europe quietly steps into a new era. Bismarck had not just built a nation, he had engineered a system. A fragile but brilliant web of alliances, secret treaties, and calculated restraint designed to keep Germany secure while avoiding the nightmare of a two-front war. For nearly 2 decades, it worked. Germany stood at the center of European diplomacy, powerful yet stable, feared yet trusted enough to negotiate with. But that system required one thing above all else: constant control. And Bismarck was the only man who truly understood how to maintain it. Wilhelm did not. At just 31 years old, Wilhelm had been Kaiser for less than 2 years when he made the decision to remove Bismarck. He believed Germany needed a new direction, one that matched his vision of prestige, strength, and global recognition. To him, Bismarck's cautious diplomacy felt outdated, restrictive, even suffocating. So he let it go. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Germany was still the most powerful state in continental Europe. It had no immediate existential threats. Its economy was booming. Its army was unmatched on land. Wilhelm inherited the strongest position any German leader had ever known. And then, slowly, he began to dismantle it. The first decision came quietly in 1890, almost unnoticed at the time. Germany allowed the reinsurance treaty with Russia to lapse. This treaty had been one of Bismarck's most important diplomatic tools, a secret agreement ensuring that Germany and Russia would remain neutral if either became involved in a war with a third power. Ending it seemed logical to Wilhelm's advisors. They argued that maintaining such a treaty conflicted with Germany's commitments to Austria-Hungary. Simplifying the alliance system, they believed, would make diplomacy cleaner and more transparent. But diplomacy is rarely that simple. Without the treaty, Russia began looking elsewhere for security. Within 4 years, it found it, in France. The Franco-Russian alliance formed in 1894, creating exactly the situation Bismarck had spent his entire career preventing. Germany was now strategically vulnerable to a war on 2 fronts. And this time, it wasn't a possibility, it was a structure. Wilhelm didn't intend this outcome. That's what makes it more dangerous. Each decision he made seemed reasonable in isolation. Each step appeared manageable, even logical. But together, they were reshaping Europe. The balance that Bismarck had carefully maintained was beginning to tilt. And Wilhelm didn't see it. He believed Germany could assert itself more openly, more confidently. He wanted respect, recognition equal to that of the British Empire. He wanted Germany to take its place in the sun. But prestige is not built in isolation. It is measured in relation to others. And every move Germany made under Wilhelm began to shift how those others responded. Where Bismarck had built trust through caution, Wilhelm began to generate suspicion through unpredictability. Still, the system did not collapse overnight. In fact, for a time, it appeared to hold. Germany remained powerful. Its rivals remained cautious. No war broke out. No crisis spiraled out of control. But beneath the surface, the structure was changing. The alliances were hardening. The margins for error were shrinking. And the man at the center of it all, the Kaiser himself, was making decisions without fully understanding their long-term consequences. This is where responsibility begins to take shape. Not in a single dramatic moment, but in a series of choices. Small adjustments. Quiet decisions. Each one narrowing the path forward. Wilhelm had inherited a system designed to prevent catastrophe. Instead of preserving it, he simplified it. Instead of managing it, he loosened it. And in doing so, he removed the very mechanisms that had kept Europe stable. By the mid-1890s, the first cracks were already visible. Germany was no longer the neutral center of diplomacy. It was becoming one side of a divided continent. The transformation had begun. And Wilhelm, whether he realized it or not, was the one driving it. If the first mistake weakened Germany's position, the second would transform it entirely. In 1898, Alfred von Tirpitz presented a bold idea to Kaiser Wilhelm II. It was called the risk fleet theory. The logic seemed simple. If Germany built a navy powerful enough to threaten Britain, then Britain would avoid conflict altogether. The cost of victory would simply be too high. Wilhelm loved it, partly because he believed it made strategic sense, but also because of something more personal. He admired Britain, envied it, even. Its navy was the symbol of global dominance, and Wilhelm wanted Germany to be seen the same way. So he approved the plan. Shipyards expanded. Budgets surged. Battleships were laid down one after another. Germany, traditionally a land power, was now challenging the greatest naval empire in the world. But the theory had one fatal flaw. It assumed Britain would hesitate. Instead, Britain adapted. In 1906, it launched HMS Dreadnought, a revolutionary battleship so advanced that it made all previous ships obsolete overnight, including its own. The result was immediate. An arms race. Germany accelerated construction. Britain responded faster. The gap never truly closed, but the tension grew rapidly. What had once been cautious neutrality between the two powers was now open strategic rivalry. And rivalry rarely stays contained. In 1904, Britain signed the Entente Cordiale with France. In 1907, it followed with an agreement with Russia. Within less than a decade, Germany found itself facing a powerful alignment of three major powers: Britain, France, Russia, the very coalition Bismarck had worked tirelessly to prevent. And yet, from Wilhelm's perspective, nothing seemed fundamentally wrong. Germany was still strong. Its army remained dominant. Its economy continued to grow. But power is not just about strength, it's about position. And Germany's position was becoming increasingly dangerous. The next crises revealed just how unstable things had become. In 1905, Wilhelm intervened in Morocco, challenging French influence in the region. It was a bold move, intended to assert Germany's global presence. Instead, it backfired. International pressure forced Germany to back down. But more importantly, it pushed Britain and France closer together. Military cooperation between them, once informal and limited, began to take shape. 6 years later, in 1911, it happened again. Another Moroccan crisis. Another attempt to assert German power. Another retreat under pressure. And once again, the effect was the same. Stronger cooperation between Germany's rivals. Stronger isolation for Germany. These weren't catastrophic failures in the traditional sense. No war broke out. No territory was lost. No immediate disaster followed. But strategically, the damage was cumulative. Each crisis tightened the alliances forming around Germany. Each miscalculation reduced the room for diplomacy. Each decision made the next crisis harder to control. This is what made Wilhelm's leadership so dangerous. He wasn't deliberately steering toward war. He was reacting, impulsively, emotionally, often inconsistently. One moment asserting dominance, the next backing down. And in doing so, he created uncertainty. Alliances began preparing for worst-case scenarios. Military planners began assuming the worst. Diplomacy became less about cooperation and more about contingency. By the early 1910s, Europe had transformed. It was no longer a flexible system of shifting alliances. It had become two rigid blocks. On one side, Germany and Austria-Hungary. On the other, Britain, France, and Russia. The balance was gone. In its place was something far more dangerous, a system where any local conflict could trigger a continental war. And still, Wilhelm did not see the full picture. He believed Germany was being encircled unfairly, that its actions were justified, that its rivals were overreacting. In reality, they were responding to a decade of signals that Germany was unpredictable, assertive, and increasingly willing to challenge the existing order. By 1914, the situation was clear, at least to those willing to see it. Europe was a powder keg. All it needed was a spark. And when that spark came, it would not be a major power that lit it. It would be a single act of violence, far from Berlin. But by then, the system Wilhelm had helped reshape would ensure that no crisis remained local for long. The 28th of June 1914. Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated. At first, it seemed like a regional crisis. A conflict centered in the Balkans, involving Austria-Hungary, Serbia, and potentially Russia. Germany did not have to be involved. That choice still existed. And then, on the 5th of July, 1914, it disappeared. Kaiser Wilhelm II gave Austria-Hungary what became known as the blank check, a guarantee of unconditional support, no matter what actions it chose to take against Serbia. It was a decisive moment. Not because Wilhelm wanted a world war, there is little evidence that he did, but because he removed the final restraint on escalation. Austria-Hungary now had the confidence to act aggressively. Russia, bound by its own interests and alliances, could not ignore that aggression. France, tied to Russia, would be drawn in. And Britain, watching the balance of power collapse, would soon follow. A chain reaction had begun. And once it started, it was almost impossible to stop. In the days that followed, there were still opportunities to de-escalate. Messages were exchanged. Warnings were issued. Diplomatic channels remained open. Barely. Nicholas II personally reached out to Wilhelm, proposing negotiations to avoid war. Their messages, written in English, reflected not just political necessity but a shared history. They were cousins, after all. Wilhelm read the messages. He made notes, but he took no decisive action. Then came the final turning point. On the 1st of August, 1914, a misleading report suggested that Britain might remain neutral if Germany avoided attacking France and focused only on Russia. For a brief moment, Wilhelm saw a way out. He ordered his military command to halt the Western offensive and redirect forces eastward. But the response he received revealed a truth he had failed to grasp for years. The system was no longer flexible. Helmuth von Moltke the Younger, Germany's chief of staff, explained that mobilization was already underway. Millions of troops were moving according to precise railway schedules. The entire plan, the famous Schlieffen Plan, depended on speed and coordination. It could not simply be stopped. It could not be reversed. The machine was in motion. And it would not listen to the Kaiser. In that moment, Wilhelm realized something critical. He was no longer in control. The war he had spent 2 decades unknowingly constructing had reached a point where it no longer required his decisions. It only required momentum. Within days, Germany invaded Belgium. Britain declared war. What began as a Balkan crisis became a global conflict. The First World War had begun. And with it, a level of destruction the world had never seen before. By the time it ended in 1918, between 15 and 20 million people were dead. Empires had collapsed. Borders had been redrawn. And the conditions for an even more devastating conflict had been set in motion. This is where the comparison to Adolf Hitler becomes unavoidable. Hitler planned his war. Step by step, decision by decision, he pursued a clear objective. Wilhelm did not. And yet, the outcome forces a difficult question. Does intention matter more than consequence? Hitler rose to power in a broken Germany, shattered by economic collapse, political instability, and the aftermath of defeat. He exploited those conditions with ruthless efficiency. Wilhelm had inherited the opposite. A stable, powerful, diplomatically dominant empire. He did not create chaos. He transformed stability into chaos through a series of decisions that, individually, seemed reasonable, but collectively proved catastrophic. That is the difference. And that is the responsibility. After the war, the world tried to assign blame. The Treaty of Versailles even proposed putting Wilhelm on trial for war crimes. But it never happened. He lived the rest of his life in exile, never facing a courtroom, never answering for the role he had played. History moved on. The focus shifted. And when the Second World War came, the scale and clarity of Hitler's crimes overshadowed everything that came before. But the path to that Second War did not begin in 1939. It began decades earlier. with decisions made between 1890 and 1914, with a system dismantled piece by piece, with opportunities ignored, with exits left unused. Wilhelm did not plan the catastrophe, but he built the conditions that made it inevitable. And sometimes, that is enough.